quiet hours of the night, before bronze had faded and before steel had a name, a sound began to echo through the valleys of an ancient world, the slow, rhythmic heartbeat of a hammer striking metal. It was not music, but it felt like prophecy. Sit back, relax, and let your mind drift to a time when fire itself became a tool of transformation. This is the story of the Iron Age, the era when humankind first learned to shape the bones of the earth into weapons, tools, and empires. Picture a world lit not by cities but by forges, where sparks rose into the darkness like fireflies carrying secrets. Villages nestled among forests and rivers became centers of creation. The air was thick with the scent of burning charcoal and the metallic temps of ore. Every strike of the hammer was a declaration that humans had claimed dominion over something once thought untamable. Yet, it was not a sudden revolution. The transition from bronze to iron began in whispers in forgotten corners of Anatolia, in the hills of India, in the valleys of Africa where small fires reached temperatures hot enough to unlock a new element of power. Some say the first iron was born not from human craft but from the sky itself. Meteorites fallen from the heavens, their otherworldly metal reshaped into blades and amulets that shimmered like stars. To those early hands, it must have felt like wielding fragments of the divine. From that moment, everything began to change. Civilizations that mastered iron rose above those that did not. Iron plows turned more earth, feeding more mouths, birthing more cities. Iron swords carved borders, toppled dynasties, and wrote the names of new rulers into the dust of the old. It was an age of both creation and destruction, of light forged from fire and shadows cast by ambition. Some historians call it the true dawn of industry, others the beginning of endless war. But all agree, once humanity learned to bend iron, the world would never again stand still. As the night deepens, imagine those first forges glowing in the dark, silent witnesses to the birth of an age that still beats within every structure, every tool, every breath of civilization. And this was only the beginning. The earliest whispers of this transformation began somewhere in the rugged lands of Anatolia, where mountains concealed veins of ore-like buried fire waiting to be awoken. The Hittites, whose empire once ruled these lands, were among the first to uncover the secret, how to coax iron from stone. Imagine the scene, a smoky forge built from mud and rock, a bellows hissing like a sleeping beast, flames licking higher as a smith leans close to the glowing crucible. The air is thick with heat and patience, for the metal will not reveal itself easily. At first, what emerged was brittle, unyielding, and cruel. The early smiths didn't yet understand the balance of heat and carbon, the dance required to turn rough bloom into supple iron. But through trial and error, through failure, they began to learn. Slowly, fragments of beauty appeared in the ash, blackened lumps hammered into shape, polished until they shone faintly beneath the soot. And when the first true iron blade was lifted into the light, a new chapter in human power began. Some legends say it was the gods who whispered this secret to man. Others suggest it was mere chance of fire that burned too hot, a stone that melted by accident. But the result was undeniable. By 1200 BC, as bronze empires faltered, those who held iron held the future. Bronze, once prized for its gleaming beauty, became a relic of softer days. The Hittite smiths guarded their methods as if they were divine commandments, their forges hidden deep within guarded valleys, their apprentices sworn to secrecy. Yet secrets have a way of escaping. When the Hittite Empire collapsed, their knowledge scattered like sparks in the wind. carried east to Persia, south to Egypt, and west to the Aegean. Each land that received it changed forever. Farmers found that iron plows cut through the soil like blades through silk. Warriors discovered that iron swords did not bend or shatter like bronze. Iron was stronger, cheaper, more abundant and, therefore, unstoppable. This shift was not just technological, it was psychological. It changed how people thought about strength, endurance, and destiny. The gods themselves seemed to favor those who wielded this new metal. And so began the spread of iron across continents. Quiet revolution forged in smoke and mystery, spreading faster than anyone could contain it. What began as sparks in Anatolia was about to ignite the world from the crumbling edges of the Hittite realm. Iron knowledge drifted outward like a rumor that refused to die. Traders carried fragments of ore and whispers of new techniques along the ancient trade routes that stitched together the Mediterranean world. Across the deserts and seas, blacksmiths began to experiment, each discovery building upon another, each failure teaching something vital. In Greece, artisans who once sculpted bronze heroes turned their hands to the darker metal, their furnaces glowing with the same relentless curiosity that had driven their ancestors to cast statues of gods. In Egypt, the pharaohs saw power in the strange black blades arriving from foreign lands, gifts from traders, who spoke of mountains that bled metal when struck with fire. These blades were not as golden or elegant as bronze, but they did not dull easily, and they did not break when kingdoms did. Iron had no need to shine. Its value lay in its endurance. Some historians believe that this subtle change in materials reflected a deeper shift in the human spirit. Bronze was a metal of beauty and ceremony. Iron was a metal of necessity, of survival. It belonged not to kings, but to workers, not to palaces, but to fields and forges. With iron, the power to shape the world began to drift away from the few and into the hands of the many. Across the Levant and into Mesopotamia, entire economies reformed around this dark miracle. Iron ore was plentiful, but smelting it required precision, patience, and an understanding of heat that bordered on the spiritual. In the glow of the forge, blacksmiths became something more than craftsmen. They became priests of transformation, their fires both sacred and dangerous. The rhythmic striking of hammers became a language of creation, and from their forges emerged not only weapons and tools, but an entirely new sense of human potential. The age of bronze heroes was fading, replaced by the ironwork of the man who could shape destiny with his own hands. Yet, even as iron spread, so too did instability. Old empires built on softer metals crumbled before armies armed with iron blades. The world was changing faster than anyone could understand, and though the fires burned bright, they cast long shadows. Iron had freed humanity from its limitations, but in doing so, it had also forged the means of its own destruction by the dawn of the first millennium before Christ. The rhythm of iron had become the pulse of civilization itself. Across Europe, Asia, and Africa, smoke rose from countless forges hidden in valleys, forests, and mountain plains, each one a beating heart of heat and sound. The world had entered a new order, and iron was its silent ruler. In the hills of Central Europe, the Hallstatt culture emerged warriors, miners, and craftsmen who carried iron tools and weapons with an authority once reserved for kings. They dug deep into the earth, carving tunnels through salt and ore, their hammers echoing beneath the mountains like thunder trapped underground. The weapons they forged, long swords, axes, and spears, were not only instruments of war, but symbols of identity, To hold iron was to command respect. To wield it was to claim power. Meanwhile, far to the east, the ancient empires of India and China were undergoing their own iron revolutions. In the Ganges Valley, the people of the Gangetic Plains discovered vast deposits of ore and began producing iron on a scale never before seen. Their furnaces reached temperatures that turned raw stone into glowing rivers of metal. In these fires, early forms of steel were born stronger, purer, and deadlier than anything the world had yet known. Chinese smelters, working in secrecy, learned to manipulate heat and air to create cast iron centuries before the West would rediscover the method. The knowledge flowed like a current across cultures, unseen yet unstoppable. From the forests of Europe to the deserts of Arabia, the language of fire united humanity under a single truth. Mastery of iron was mastery of fate. But this mastery came at a cost. The forests that once stretched endlessly began to thin, consumed by the endless hunger for charcoal. Rivers darkened with the runoff of ore. The air grew thick with the scent of burning earth. Humanity was no longer merely adapting to nature, it was reshaping it, bending it to its will. And with each hammer strike, the gap between man and the world he came from widened. The Iron Age was not only a technological evolution, it was a moral one. It taught humanity that creation and destruction were twin flames burning from the same fire. As the sound of hammers spread from forge to forge, it carried both promise and warning, reminder that every age born of fire must one day face the smoke it leaves behind. In the shadow of iron's spread, the Mediterranean world entered a period of turbulence and rebirth. Civilizations that once ruled with bronze crowns began to crumble beneath the weight of new technologies and shifting powers. The sea peoples raided from the coasts, cities fell to ashes, and empires that had stood for centuries suddenly vanished. Historians call this the Late Bronze Age collapse. Mystery wrapped in ruin, but some whisper that the true force behind it was not war or famine alone, but the quiet revolution of iron. As bronze supplies dwindled and trade routes fractured, iron offered independence. Any people with fire, ore, and patience could arm themselves without bowing to distant kings or merchants. This change broke the world's hierarchy apart and remade it from the ground up. Small tribes rose as great powers fell. The Israelites, the Philistines, and the early Greeks each found themselves transformed by this new material, its weight both literal and symbolic. The Philistines, perhaps inheritors of Hittite iron knowledge, forged weapons that outmatched their rivals and changed the balance of ancient warfare. Their secret became a legend: the smiths who could draw strength from stone, whose fires could turn earth into power. Across the sea, the Greeks entered their dark age, a time of silence in written record but deep transformation beneath the surface. Iron tools spread through their fields, iron swords through their myths, and from this crucible of loss and renewal would emerge the spark of classical civilization. To the north, Celtic tribes began to master the same art, their Latin culture shaping metal into forms that were both elegant and terrifying: curved blades, ornate shields, jewelry that shimmered like coiled fire. Iron became a language of art as much as war, and in every society that learned its grammar, a new identity was born. The old gods of bronze faded, replaced by gods of the forge: Hephaestus, Vulcan, Ogun spirits of creation who embodied both the gift and the curse of mastery over fire. The Iron Age was no longer a regional phenomenon. It had become a global awakening. But with that awakening came unrest. Every village that learned to forge also learned to fight. and the world's quiet hum of creation began to sound more and more like the drumbeat of conquest. The age of empires was stirring once again. As the centuries unfolded, the mastery of iron reshaped the face of Europe. Forests became workshops, rivers turned into trade routes, and the sound of hammers echoed across valleys like a heartbeat that no longer belonged to the earth but to mankind. The Halstead culture evolved into the Latine civilization, and the Celts' once scattered tribes rose as an interconnected people bound by art, metal, and myth. Their smiths were both craftsmen and mystics, working in solitude beside roaring fires, transforming cold ore into shapes that seemed to pulse with spirit. Their swords bore flowing patterns, each swirl of iron and carbon like veins through which ancient power flowed. Some say these smiths sang as they worked, believing their songs gave them metal strength. Others claim they offered prayers, for to shape iron was to touch the divine. The Celts did not simply forge tools, they forged identity, beauty, and terror all at once. Their ornament stalks of twisted iron and gold glimmered on warriors and chieftains who rode into battle under grey skies, their armor catching the faint light of dawn. Yet their brilliance was not eternal. To the south, a new force was rising, one that would take the art of iron and turn it into empire. Rome, a small settlement on the Tiber, was learning the same lessons the Celts had mastered, but applying them with discipline rather than mystery. Roman blacksmiths worked in organized forges, producing standardized weapons, nails, and armor that fed a growing military machine. Their iron was not made for beauty, but for control. Every sword was identical, every spear predictable, every chain strong enough to bind nations. The Romans turned iron from a craft into a system. With their conquest of Europe, they inherited the Celtic mines, the Iberian forges, and the knowledge of the Greek and Etruscan artisans before them. They melted all of it down, not just the metal, but the cultures themselves, recasting them into the order of empire. Iron roads, iron tools, iron armies, the material became the skeleton of Rome's ambition. Yet even at its peak, the empire could not escape the same paradox that haunted every civilization born of the forge, that what is made to endure also invites decay. The very metal that built Rome's power would, in time, arm the tribes that would bring it to ruin. For every empire born of iron, another waited in the shadows to inherit its flame as Rome expanded. The empire's hunger for iron became insatiable. Legions marched across continents, each soldier a walking testament to the power of metal armor, gleaming beneath the sun. Shields reinforced with rivets, swords sharpened to a deadly perfection. The Roman smiths, laboring in the smoke-choked workshops of Gaul, Spain, and Britannia, became the unseen architects of conquest. They refined furnaces, perfected bloomery techniques, and learned to weld iron with bronze for flexibility and strength. Their tools built roads that stretched like veins across the empire, bridges that defied rivers, aqueducts that defied distance. Yet with every expansion, Rome's iron heart grew heavier. The ore came from conquered lands, the charcoal from felled forests, the labor from slaves who toiled in mines deep beneath the earth. It was said that in Noricumfer Empire's great iron province, the air shimmered with metallic dust, and the clang of hammers never ceased, even at night. Roman iron was everywhere, in the gates that guarded cities, in the nails that held ships together, in the chains that bound men to their fates. But within this machinery of progress, a strange irony took root. The same forges that armed Rome's legions also equipped its enemies. Germanic tribes along the frontiers scavenged and copied Roman weapons, learning the secrets of their steel. Blacksmiths in forests far beyond the empire's borders began to experiment, blending local ores, creating blades of surprising resilience. The more Rome shared its technology through conquest, the more it sowed the seeds of its own undoing. In the north, beyond the mist-covered forests and frozen seas, a new people watched and learned, the ancestors of the Vikings, masters of ship and steel yet to come. They studied Roman blades not as relics but as blueprints for their future. The empire believed itself eternal, but the forge teaches no loyalty. Fire serves whoever controls it, and in the dark corners of Europe, other fires were being kindled small, defiant, waiting for their moment. By the 3rd century, as internal strife and foreign invasions tore through Rome, its iron network began to fracture. The same tools that had built its greatness were now scattered among the hands of those who sought to destroy it. The sound of hammers no longer sang of expansion, but of preparation for a world that was breaking apart, yet unknowingly forging something new from its ruins. When the great cities of Rome dimmed and the empire's legions faded into the smoke of history, the world did not fall silent, simply changed its rhythm. The echo of iron did not cease. It deepened, traveling through monasteries, villages, and forgotten valleys where men still bent metal to their will. Across the ruins of civilization, fragments of Roman ironwork lay half buried beneath moss and soil, discovered by new generations of smiths who studied them as relics of a vanished age. In Britain, the Anglo-Saxons forged their own traditions, blending Roman precision with Germanic artistry. Their furnaces still bore traces of the old empire's design, yet their creation swords etched with runes, spearheads carved with geometric souls belonged to another world entirely. Each piece of metal carried both memory and prophecy. In northern Italy, the Lombards continued the Roman craft, producing hinges, armor, and tools in the shadows of aqueducts that still ran with water. Even as their kings ruled from crumbling cities, their smiths carried forward the torch of technical knowledge that had once belonged to imperial engineers. Iron, it seemed, had become the great survivor during the fall of empires, preserving human skill when libraries burned and roads collapsed. In dimly lit monastic workshops, monks kept this silent inheritance alive. Their hammers struck not for war, but for order, producing nails, locks, and agricultural tools that rebuilt what had been lost. Within their quiet walls, ancient Roman treatises were copied by candlelight, ensuring that the knowledge of metallurgy, of heat and hardness, was never entirely forgotten. The Benedictines, in their devotion to labor and learning, became the new guardians of the forge. What had once been a weapon of conquest now became an instrument of preservation. But the old fire was restless. In the hands of the Franks, iron found its rhythm again, not as a tool of builders, but as the heartbeat of warriors. Across Gaul, workshops hummed with the revival of Roman smelting techniques fused with Frankish pattern welding. The sword became not only a weapon but a signature of civilization, its watered steel a language of strength, art, and continuity. Even as Europe's map splintered into 1,000 feudal territories, the glow of iron remained, constant a pulse of heat beneath the cold ashes of empire, promising that from ruin a new age would rise. The Frankish world of the 6th and 7th centuries breathed through the forge. Beneath timbered roofs blackened by soot, smiths became keepers of both war and wonder. Their furnaces roared with the same hunger that once fueled Roman industry. Yet what they created was something uniquely theirs, a new synthesis of art and engineering. The Merovingian workshops, scattered across Gaul and the Rhineland, revealed through archaeological traces an astonishing continuity of Roman ironwork, water-powered hammers, double bellows that maintained precise heat, and complex smelting systems capable of producing consistent, high-quality metal. Yet within this technical mastery, a transformation was taking place. The sword was no longer merely a tool of the state. It had become a spiritual symbol, a vessel of lineage and faith. Frankish pattern welding embodied that duality, merging function and beauty in ways the ancients could scarcely have imagined. Layer upon layer of iron and steel were heated, twisted, and folded, producing blades that shimmered with serpentine patterns, the visible scars of their own creation. The process demanded not only precision, but patience, as the smith balanced carbon and heat like a priest balancing sin and salvation. Each weapon emerged from fire as a singular entity, its soul tempered by both craftsmanship and chance. Those who wielded them, kings, warriors, or priests, believed that power itself could be contained within metal, that the blade held the essence of man and God alike. In the sagas and songs of the time, these weapons were named and revered as living beings. Joyous, Durandal, Gram. They were not simply forged, they were born. Yet beneath this mythology lay hard skill, mathematical understanding, and centuries of observation passed down through calloused hands. The Frankish forges connected to the monasteries that preserved ancient texts, forming a quiet alliance between faith and fire. Knowledge flowed between them, unseen but vital, ensuring that even as kingdoms rose and fell, the language of metal remained unbroken. Across Europe, from the marshes of England to the forests of the Danube, the pulse of the hammer echoed through the dawn of the Middle Ages, a steady reminder that civilization, even when shattered, could always be rebuilt with iron and will. But beyond the Alps, in the Byzantine East, another fire was burning, older, colder, and infinitely more precise. A different vision of the Iron Age was taking shape, one rooted in continuity rather than collapse. In the East, the Roman spirit had not died, it had evolved into something resilient, austere, and methodical. Within the marble walls of Constantinople, the Byzantine Empire guarded the ancient knowledge of iron and fire with the same devotion it reserved for scripture. Here, smiths worked beneath vaulted ceilings, their forges glowing like altars, producing tools, weapons, and architectural marvels that carried the weight of centuries. The Theodosian walls stood as the ultimate expression of this mastery. Massive stone ramparts bound by iron clamps and fortified with metal gates so complex that even invaders marveled at their construction. Byzantine engineers had inherited the precision of Rome but refined it through contact with Persians, Arabs, and Slavs, absorbing and transforming foreign techniques into something distinct. Their ironwork wasn't only practical, it was strategic, measured, and deeply calculated. The metallurgy that sustained their armies also fed their artisans, who forged intricate hinges, locks, and mechanisms for cathedrals and palaces. Within these works lay echoes of the old empire, was still the skeleton of civilization. And then came the weapon that defied time and logic: Greek fire. Developed in the 7th century, it was not a flame of wood or oil, but a liquid inferno that clung to water, devoured ships, and shattered the confidence of entire fleets. Its composition remains one of history's best-kept secrets, a blend of chemistry and metallurgy centuries ahead of its time. The pumps and siphons used to project it were crafted from heterosistant iron, machines that hissed and screamed as they unleashed the empire's wrath across the sea. Every element from the bronze fittings to the iron valves had to withstand the violence of fire turned liquid. In this synthesis of science and war, Byzantium revealed a truth that Europe had forgotten, that metal was not merely a weapon, but a language through which empires spoke. Beyond the city's walls, Byzantine blacksmiths crafted armor so finely jointed it moved like fabric, helmets that gleamed beneath mosaicked light, and surgical instruments whose design would not be surpassed for 1,000 years. They were heirs to Rome, yet custodians of something older still, a conversation between fire and flesh that began when humanity first pulled ore from stone. But soon another power would rise, drawn from the desert winds and driven by faith, carrying its own interpretation of metal, mastery, and meaning the Islamic world. From the sands of Arabia to the bustling workshops of Damascus, iron found a new kind of devotion under the rise of Islam. Here, metal was no longer only a tool of empire, it became a symbol of divine precision, an extension of cosmic order. The Quran itself spoke of iron as a gift sent down from the heavens, a material of mighty strength and benefit to mankind, and that celestial belief shaped how it was treated. In Damascus, the rhythmic clang of hammers echoed through narrow alleys where master smiths forged the most mysterious and revered steel the world had ever known. Damascus steel. Blades born from this process shimmered like water under light, their surfaces rippling with delicate waves of grey and silver. They could slice silk mid-air or cleave through iron itself, yet they were made by hands that prayed before each tempering, believing the process was half science, half blessing. The secret lay not only in the carbon content, but in the patience, the repeated folding, the careful cooling, the silence between strikes. It was said that a true swordsmith could hear the metal speak, its tone revealing when it was ready to be quenched or struck again. Beyond the forges, Islamic architects turned iron into poetry. In cities like Baghdad, Samarra, and Cordoba, the same material that shaped swords became the invisible skeleton within domes and arches. Iron clamps bound vast stones in place. Metal rods carried the weight of knowledge within libraries and mosques. The House of Wisdom in Baghdad, where scholars translated the texts of Greece, Persia, and India, often used iron tools to craft delicate instruments for astronomy and medicine. Iron was intellect solidified, faith tempered into form. As trade routes expanded, Islamic blacksmiths met Indian woods, steel a crucible-born alloy of remarkable purity, and from this fusion came the pinnacle of blade-making. Traders carried it westward, where crusaders, meeting it for the first time, thought it otherworldly. The Islamic world had turned metallurgy into a sacred art, blending empirical skill with mystical reverence. And as their empires grew, so too did their influence. Their knowledge of ore, flame, and form would soon pour into Europe's awakening mind, carried on ships through scholars, and across the silent deserts where caravans shimmered under the iron sun. Across the European continent, the echo of iron's rebirth spread slowly but relentlessly, carried by crusaders returning from the east, by traders crossing the Mediterranean, and by monks who guarded lost fragments of knowledge within the cold stone of abbeys. By the 11th century, Europe's forges had begun to burn brighter again, this time fueled not by conquest but by necessity. Iron became the backbone of a world struggling toward order after centuries of chaos. Blacksmiths, once humble village craftsmen, emerged as the quiet architects of a new era. In towns surrounded by forests and streams, they built water-powered hammers, mills that could pound red-hot metal with rhythmic precision, turning manual labor into mechanical rhythm. The air around these places shimmered with the hiss of steam and the ring of anvils, like a heartbeat echoing through valleys. Here, armor was no longer a simple defense, it was an art. Chainmail evolved into plate, each piece shaped and riveted to move with the human form. Knights became walking sculptures of iron, embodiments of power and chivalry, their shining bodies reflections of a world rediscovering structure. But while metal protected, it also imprisoned. The same hands that forged swords and shields also built iron cages, shackles, and instruments of faith and punishment. Cathedrals rose toward heaven with iron nails binding stone to stone, while beneath them dungeons were lined with bars of the same material. The duality of iron, its ability to both elevate and oppress, became the silent metaphor of medieval life. The age of faith depended on it. Even the bells that called the faithful to prayer were cast from its kin, resonating across towns with tones that were half warning, half worship. In these centuries, Europe rediscovered the discipline of the forge as both craft and calling. Iron was no longer just the medium of war, it was the skeleton of civilization, running through ploughs that carved the land, tools that built cathedrals, and chains that bound men to kings. Yet even as Europe strengthened itself in steel, a new whisper was rising, a whisper of fire, of a force that could move mountains and bend nature itself. In the centuries to come, that whisper would grow into the thunder of revolution, as the mastery of metal would finally break free from the hands of the few and reshape the destiny of the many. The Renaissance arrived not with the sound of trumpets, but with the hiss of the forge, the scrape of files against metal, and the slow awakening of the human mind to its own creative potential. In cities like Florence, Venice, and Nuremberg, iron became the silent partner of genius. Leonardo da Vinci's sketches danced with gears, springs, and levers, each one a testament to a mind that saw in metal not just strength but motion, balance, and beauty. His notebooks described machines of flight, hydraulic tools, and self-propelled carts, all conceived in a world where iron had finally learned to obey imagination. Artisans began to see themselves not as laborers but as thinkers with hammers, philosophers of flame. Metallurgy itself evolved into an experiment in alchemy. Smiths and scholars alike believed that within the heart of iron lay secrets of transformation, the bridge between base and noble, earth and divine. Furnaces became laboratories. Sparks became symbols of enlightenment. Across Europe, gunpowder and cannon transformed warfare, replacing the intimate brutality of sword and shield with the impersonal roar of iron and fire. The age of knights ended in smoke, and the sound of battle became thunder rolling across stone walls and open fields. Yet even as weapons advanced, so too did architecture. Iron's role in construction shifted from hidden skeleton to expressive art. In Venice, iron anchors held floating palaces steady in their watery graves. In Germany, iron tools carved delicate details into cathedral facades, precision impossible in earlier centuries. Metal was now intelligent, solidified, responsive, intricate, alive. The Renaissance mind understood that mastery of matter was mastery of meaning. Everywhere, iron linked invention to identity, its glow a reflection of human ambition. But the greatest change was yet to come. Beneath the soil of England and the forests of northern Europe, vast veins of ore waited, untouched. The men who would uncover them did not yet understand that their discovery would not only forge tools or weapons, it would forge time itself. For out of these dark mines, through the roar of bellows and the sweat of countless men, the world would be reborn into an era of steam, speed, and smoke. The Iron Age, it seemed, had never truly ended, was only gathering strength for its next transformation. Deep beneath the rolling hills of England, the Industrial Revolution began with a heartbeat of metal. The ground itself trembled with the rhythm of hammers, the groan of gears, and the endless hiss of steam escaping from valves of iron. It was not born in palaces, but in blackened foundries where men worked in heat that blurred the line between flesh and flame. The blast furnace became the new temple, and its altar burned night and day, fed by coal, air, and ambition. Iron was no longer the work of individuals. It was the breath of nations. The smelting process evolved through minds like Abraham Darby, who learned to replace charcoal with coke, turning what was once scarce into abundance. The result was metal that could shape empires. Bridges stretched across rivers like metallic rainbows. Locomotives thundered across the landscape, carrying dreams and goods at speeds unimaginable. And cities rose vertically on skeletons of iron. Humanity had found a way to harness earth and air, turning ore into motion. Steam engines became the beating hearts of progress, their pistons pumping like the pulse of a new organism, the machine. But the beauty of progress came with its shadow. The same furnaces that forged prosperity also birthed poverty. As blackened skies hung over slums filled with soot-covered children and weary workers, the forge had become an empire in itself, demanding sacrifices of flesh and spirit. Yet, even amid the suffering, the world was mesmerized by what it had created. Ships of iron replaced those of wood, their hulls cutting through oceans with unstoppable precision. Telegraph wires, strung like veins of light, carried thoughts across continents. Humanity had done what the ancients had only dreamed it, had fused its will with the material of the earth. Every invention seemed a hymn to iron's power. From the spinning gears of textile mills to the ringing tracks of railway lines, the world was now moving to the rhythm of industry. The Iron Age had been reborn as the Industrial Age, and its reach was infinite. But in that same relentless expansion, there lingered a question no machine could answer. When humanity forged this world of metal and smoke, had it mastered iron ore? Had iron mastered humanity? As the 19th century deepened, iron reshaped not only the landscape, but the very psychology of civilization. Cities became jungles of steel and soot, cathedrals of commerce rising where forests once stood. The sound of progress was no longer the whisper of wind or the rush of rivers, it was the clang of railways, the scream of metal wheels grinding against iron tracks. From London to New York, from Berlin to Bombay, the world pulsed with an industrial heartbeat. Iron bridges stretched across great chasms as if defying gravity itself. The Eiffel Tower pierced the sky like a monument to human audacity, a lattice of metal that shimmered in sunlight and glowed like an ember at night. It was the new symbol of faith not in gods, but in mankind's ability to shape the earth. But while cities grew, the world's hunger for or dug deeper into the earth's bones. Minds expanded endlessly downward, swallowing men into the darkness. The miners, their faces streaked with sweat and coal, became the unseen priests of progress, offering their lives to keep the furnaces fed. In the colonies, iron rails carved through jungles and deserts, spreading empire like veins through flesh. Yet in the quiet between the engines and explosions, poets and philosophers began to wonder if something ancient was being lost. The more humanity mastered metal, the more it seemed enslaved by its own invention. Iron, once sacred and mysterious, had become ordinary, a tool of endless production, stripped of wonder. The artist's chisel, the warrior's blade, The blacksmiths' anvil symbols of individuality were being replaced by machines that knew neither pride nor soul. Still, the transformation could not be stopped. Ships of iron ruled the seas. Factories birthed steel stronger than anything the ancients could imagine, and cities gleamed with railways that ran like veins of fire. It was an age of miracles and misery intertwined, where human progress came wrapped in smoke. The same element that once crowned empires was now the invisible ruler of all. Every clock, every bolt, every weapon, every bridge whispered the same truth, that the world had entered a new covenant with metal. And as the glow of furnaces painted the night sky red, a quiet thought began to spread. Perhaps humanity had become the very thing it once worshipped, the iron heart of its own creation. The turn of the 20th century brought with it a new breed of alchemy, the age of steel. Electricity and speed, iron, tempered and refined, gave birth to its stronger descendant, steel, lighter yet unyielding, flexible yet eternal. The world seemed to quicken its pulse as skyscrapers began to rise like metallic mountains, their steel frames piercing the heavens where once only cathedrals had dared to reach. The human dream of touching the divine was no longer spiritual lit, was structural. In the roar of engines and the hum of turbines, humanity discovered motion itself could be forged. Automobiles thundered across new roads, their iron hearts burning fuel and ambition in equal measure. Airplanes, stitched together with metal bones and canvas skin, defied gravity and turned the sky into another forge. War, too, changed its language. No longer the clash of swords and shields, it became the scream of artillery, the thunder of tanks, the cold precision of bullets flying faster than thought. The First World War was not just a conflict of nations, it was the first war of machines, where iron met flesh on an industrial scale. Trenches were lined with steel helmets, machine guns sang in mechanical rhythm, and the sky rained shards of molten shrapnel. Humanity had turned its mastery of metal into a mirror, and what it saw reflected was both awe and horror. Yet from the wreckage rose innovation. Factories perfected the art of mass production. Bridges stretched farther, ships grew larger, and the planet seemed to shrink as locomotives and telegraphs bound continents together. The rhythm of life became metallica, constant clatter, hum, and hiss of progress. Cities no longer slept. Even at night, their streets glowed orange under iron lamps, while beneath their surface, subway tunnels carried people through veins of steel. The material that had once belonged to warriors and kings now belonged to everyone. Iron was democracy in elemental form, ubiquitous, cheap, and indispensable. But as technology advanced, something ancient stirred again. The same tension between creation and destruction, between mastery and surrender. For with every new invention came a darker reflection, a reminder that the same metal that built bridges could also build bombs. And in the decades to come, that contradiction would reach its most terrifying expression, the moment when iron, in its purest and most potent form, would decide the fate of the entire world. The Second World War was the ultimate crucible of iron and age, when humanity's mastery of metal turned against itself with unprecedented ferocity. The planet became a vast machine, its arteries filled with trains of tanks, ships, and planes, all forged in roaring furnaces and assembled in endless lines of labor. Steel factories ran without rest, their smoke blotting out the sun, their sparks falling like artificial stars over cities consumed by war. In this conflict, iron was no longer a symbol of civilization, it was its executioner. Tanks rolled across Europe's fields like mechanical beasts, their treads grinding history into dust. Aircraft of aluminum and steel filled the skies in flocks, each engine scream a hymn to speed and annihilation. Battleships, floating fortresses of iron, roamed the seas, their guns breathing fire that could level entire coastlines. Humanity had become inseparable from its machines. Soldiers were encased in steel, pilots flew within it, and civilians hid beneath it. Yet beneath the horror, innovation thrived. Metallurgists discovered alloys that could endure impossible heat. Engineers designed engines that defied nature's limits, and the boundary between human and metal grew thin. Every invention birthed its opposite each. Marvel of engineering carried within it the seed of destruction. In the deserts of North Africa, the glare of sunlight on tank armor burned like a vision from another age, while in the frozen ruins of Stalingrad, iron twisted under cold so fierce it shattered like glass. The world had learned to speak fluently in the language of metal and fire, and when the war reached its climax, that language changed forever. On the morning of August 6, 1945, a new sun rose over Hiroshima, blinding light born not from fire or forge, but from the splitting of the atom itself. The age of iron had given birth to the age of energy, and in that single instant, metal seemed almost primitive. Cities once built by steel now melted beneath its unleashed fury. Humanity had transcended its oldest element, but the spirit of iron, its strength, its duality, its cold endurance, remained at the heart of everything. When the dust settled, the world looked upon its creation with awe and terror. The ancient covenant between mankind and metal had reached its most terrifying truth, that mastery and madness were now one and the same, bound forever in the glow of progress. When the smoke of war cleared, the world awoke to a silence that hummed with electricity. The age of iron had not ended, had simply evolved, its strength reborn in new forms, lighter, sharper, and invisible. Steel no longer carried only the weight of bridges and tanks. It carried the skeletons of skyscrapers, the frames of airplanes, the nerves of industry. Across the mid-20th century, iron became civilization's quiet companion, hidden beneath the skin of modernity. Cities transformed into networks of steel and glass, their towers reaching higher, their streets pulsing with cars whose bodies gleamed under the neon glow of progress. The hum of transformers replaced the clang of forges, and the fire of coal gave way to the cold hum of atomic energy. Humanity had conquered metal so completely that it forgot how to live without it. Trains streaked across continents on rails of polished steel. Ships of iron carried oil, grain, and dreams across oceans. Every object in daily life, every hinge, nail, and circuit was a descendant of the Iron Age's first flame. Yet beneath the triumph of technology, the same ancient rhythm persisted: creation and decay, mastery and dependence. The Cold War turned iron into ideology as nations built fortresses, missiles, and submarines that waited silently beneath the seas, armored in steel and aimed toward oblivion. The world existed in a state of iron tension between invention and extinction. Even as computers emerged, their delicate circuits traced with copper and silicon. Their outer shells still echoed the hardness of metal. In factories, robots of steel arms replaced the blacksmith's hammer, their movements perfect, tireless, indifferent. Humanity had mechanized its own reflection. But there was poetry still in metal the way. Bridges curved over rivers like iron rainbows. The way city skylines shimmered like blades in fog. The material that once represented survival now embodied ambition, the relentless desire to go faster, higher, farther. Yet the question lingered like rust beneath the surface. Had the forge that once built empires now forged cages instead? As satellites launched into orbit, metal shells circling endlessly above the planet, the Iron Age had finally left the ground. But not the human heart. For wherever we built, wherever we dreamed, the echo of hammer against anvil still whispered through time, reminding us that every spark of progress was born from fire. By the late 20th century, humanity had entered an era where iron was no longer seen, but felt a silent foundation beneath. The glass and plastic that defined modern life. The world had become a living machine, its pulse driven by steel veins buried beneath the streets, carrying power, data, and movement. Skyscrapers stood as monuments, not only to ambition, but to the enduring strength of metal hidden beneath their mirrored skins. Subways roared beneath cities like mechanical serpents, the rails gleaming with the same metallic sheen that once belonged to swords and shields. Airplanes crossed oceans in hours, their frames of alloy slicing through the stratosphere, their engines echoing the same fire that once roared in ancient forges. Even the most delicate technologies, the satellites in orbit, the probes sent beyond the solar system, were armored in metal born from the Earth's bones. Yet as humanity's mastery of matter grew, so too did its distance from the forge. The blacksmith had become an engineer. The hammer had become the factory line. The intimacy of creation was gone, replaced by precision, automation, and scale. And in this distance, something ancient was lost: the reverence for the material itself. Iron had once demanded respect. Now it was merely a tool, a component, a silent servant in a world of abundance. But nature has its memory, and metal remembers too. Bridges rusted, machines decayed, cities crumbled from within, as if the earth sought to reclaim what had been stolen. Rust became the great equalizer, the quiet voice of time reminding humanity that even steel returns to dust. Artists began to rediscover its beauty. Sculptors and architects sought again the raw texture of oxidized metal, seeing in it the poetry of impermanence. Meanwhile, industries raced to reinvent its stainless steel, carbon composites, alloys that could resist heat, time, and decay. The dream of eternal strength had never left humanity. It merely changed form. In laboratories, scientists whispered of metals that could think, materials that could remember their shape, self-healing alloys that blurred the line between lifeless and living. The Iron Age had not vanished, had gone inward, into atoms, into memory, into the coded logic of machines. And as humanity stared into its own reflection glass, steel and light it, began to wonder whether it had transcended the forge or simply become one with it. The 21st century arrived, wrapped in a new illusion, the belief that humanity had left the age of metal behind. Silicon, carbon, and code became the new gods of progress. Yet, beneath every screen, every satellite, every skyscraper, the old pulse of iron still beat, silent but steady. The digital world was built on physical bone servers, encased in steel, networks tethered by copper, and machines cooled by the same elements that once forged swords and shields. Even the sleekest technologies, from smartphones to spacecraft, were born in foundries and refineries, extracted from the same earth that ancient blacksmiths once dug their ore. The forge had simply gone invisible. Beneath the sterile hum of technology, fire still burned. Modern cities glowed at night like furnaces turned inside out, their windows flickering like embers in the dark. The sound of industry had changed, But its essence had not. It was the same rhythm, now quieter, hidden beneath algorithms and automation. Humans had traded the hammer's ring for the whisper of machines, but progress carried its shadows. The demand for metals surged once more: iron for infrastructure, cobalt for batteries, rare earths for screens and satellites. Entire regions were mined to exhaustion, mountains gutted, rivers poisoned, all to sustain a civilization that believed itself immaterial. The irony was poetic. The more humanity pursued a world of light and code, the deeper it burrowed into the soil for metal. And as new wars emerged, not for faith or land, but for minerals, the echoes of the ancient forge returned in haunting form. The same element that built civilization now sustained it, and perhaps one day might end it. Yet amid the consumption and decay, there were glimpses of rebirth. Architects sculpted new cities of iron and glass that breathed like living organisms. Engineers experimented with biodegradable alloys, blending the old with the new. The dream of mastery over metal had evolved into a search for harmony with it. For in every plane, every bridge, every gleaming skyline, the truth remained unchanged. Iron was not merely a tool of humanity. It was its reflection. It carried within it the story of creation, destruction, and renewal, mirror of the human soul forged in fire. And though the age had shifted from the clang of forges to the hum of circuits, the legacy of metal still whispered beneath it all. The progress, no matter how advanced, would always bear the scent of smoke and the memory of flame. The story of iron was never just about the material, it was about transformation, the eternal cycle of destruction and creation that defined the human journey. From the first sparks in a cave to the towering furnaces of industry, from swords raised in conquest to satellites orbiting silent skies, iron had been the silent witness, the constant companion, the unyielding spine of civilization. It had shaped empires, carried gods, and built machines that touched the stars. And yet, for all its strength, its story was always intertwined with fragility, the fragility of those who wielded it, who believed they had mastered it, only to be mastered in return. The forge was both a blessing and a curse, granting power and demanding reverence. Civilizations rose on the promise of its strength and fell when they forgot the fire that birthed it. In that forgotten reverence lay a warning. The ancients had understood something modern man had lost: the spiritual weight of metal. To them, iron was not inert. It was alive, a conduit between worlds, a sacred element drawn from the earth's blood. The smelting process was ritual, the hammer a prayer, and the spark a breath of creation. The gods of the old world were born in smoke and flame, not marble and myth. Every blade carried intention, every tool carried purpose. And when those who forged forgot that purpose, when iron became mere commodity, its spirit turned cold. Today, that spiritual connection flickers only in the margins among blacksmiths who still shape with hands instead of machines, among artisans who listen to the metal as it bends, among historians who whisper the old stories of furnaces that breathed like beasts. They remember that iron was never conquered. It merely allowed itself to be used. Perhaps that is the quiet truth behind every empire's fall: the moment when humanity forgets that power is borrowed, not owned. For just as the Iron Age once replaced the Bronze, so too will this digital age one day fade into something new. But when it does, the forge will remain. Somewhere, in some form, the rhythm of hammer and flame will continue, echoing through the ages as a heartbeat of civilization. For as long as there are hands to build, minds to dream, and fires to burn. The legacy of iron will live not in machines or monuments, but in the enduring will of those who dare to shape the world from raw earth and relentless flame. So, as the final embers of this long journey fade, imagine the world not through the eyes of progress, but through the breath of the forge. Hear the hiss of molten metal meeting cool air, the rhythmic heartbeat of the hammer striking anvil, the faint shimmer of light that once illuminated the dawn of civilization. From the blackened caves of ancient Anatolia to the glowing steel mills of the industrial age, iron has been the unseen narrator of human ambition. Every empire, every rebellion, every monument of pride or desperation has carried within it the same element that sleeps beneath our feet. And perhaps that is the most haunting truth of all, that the story of iron is, in the end, the story of us. A story of transformation, of creation through destruction, of beauty born in fire. It reminds us that power always carries a cost, that the same fire that gives life can also consume it, and that every civilization built in brilliance must one day return to ash. Yet, in that return lies renewal. Even as the furnaces cool and the smoke clears, iron waits patiently beneath the surface, ready for the next dreamer to find it, to heat it, to shape it into something that carries meaning once again. Across time, the forges may change, form now hidden in laboratories instead of mountains, humming with electricity instead of wind, but the essence remains. The same curiosity that drove ancient smiths to pull fire from stone now drives engineers to sculpt alloys for stars. The same hands that once forged blades now shape circuits, yet both are acts of transformation, expressions of will upon matter. And as you drift deeper into the quiet of this history, let that thought linger, that perhaps every tool we make, every machine we build, is not a departure from the past, but a continuation of that ancient promise to take what is raw, what is rough and unformed, and give it purpose. The Iron Age never ended. It merely evolved, folding itself into our blood, our bones, our very imagination. The forge still burns in factories, in minds, in hearts that refuse to stop creating. And if you listen closely, beyond the hum of the modern world, you can still hear it, the steady, eternal rhythm of the hammer, shaping not just metal, but the soul of humanity itself.